Hello everyone, I am Dr. Digambar Ghodke from the Department of English. I welcome you all to this lesson 3 on research methodology. In this lesson, we shall discuss some key terms in research and research methodology, and we will continue this discussion on the key terms in the next lesson, that is lesson number 4 also. Let's begin with the first term, that is action research. Action research in education typically refers to a reflective inquiry to understand and improve practice. Action research typically involves identifying the problem, developing a research plan, collecting and analyzing data, incorporating findings into planning, implementing actions, and monitoring and evaluation. The next term that I am going to talk about is association. An association is a relationship between two elements, factors or events, but the association cannot be proved or explained. Associations can be positive, for example, using audio visual aids in teaching is associated with better learning outcomes, or negative, for example, higher student absenteeism is associated with lower performance. The third key term is applied or decisional research. This involves undertaking pure or fundamental research to solve specific practical questions for policy formulation, administration, and understanding of a phenomenon. The next key term is baseline. A baseline is an information from an initial point in time. It is often used for comparison to see how things change over time. The next term that we are familiar with is bibliography. A bibliography is a list of all the sources the researcher has used in the process of researching the work. This may include all works and sources which may have been used in the research or not. Causation is another term that we are going to talk here. Causation is when one element, factor or event is known to cause another. For example, a particular teaching practice is known to lead to improvements in student test scores. To prove causation between two things, let's say between A and B, researchers need to show first what association is there between A and B. Secondly, that A happens before B. Thirdly, that B is not caused by a third thing, that is C or D. In an educational settings, proving causation is often challenging because of the many influences on teacher and student outcomes. The next term that I am going to talk about here is comparison groups or control groups. A comparison group is a group of people in a study, in a research, whose responses or the results function as a comparison against which the effect of the approach being tested can be measured. Comparison groups receive a different treatment to the group receiving the treatment or approach being tested. There can be any number of comparison groups in a study. A comparison group is called a control group when it receives no treatment as such. The next term that we are going to talk about is correlational design research. Correlational design research seeks to discover if two variables are associated or related in some way using statistical analysis while observing the variables. For example, if the heat is reduced or increased during cooking, how it affects or how the food reacts to it is an example. The next term is conceptual research. Conceptual research is associated with some theoretical idea or ideas or some kind of presuppositions. It is generally used by philosophers and thinkers to develop new concepts or to get a better understanding of an existing concept in practice. Now we shall go ahead with the next term, that is context or contextual factors. Context refers to the social, cultural and environmental factors in research setting. Context can affect the outcomes of research. The evidence generated in one context may not necessarily apply to a different context. Evidence is most relevant when generated in a context similar to the context in which it will be applied. The location of the study, demographics of research, participants, or the level of organizational support for the particular approach being researched are part of the context. Now we shall proceed further with the next term, that is data. Data is information that is collected and analyzed to present the findings and conclusions of the research. Data can be qualitative or quantitative. Now we shall go ahead with yet another term, that is descriptive research. Descriptive research explains a situation, problem, phenomenon, service or program, or it provides information. This information may be about the socio-economic conditions of a community or the description of attitudes of people towards an issue. It is used to answer questions of who, what, when, where and how associated with a particular research question or problem. The next term is developing a conceptual framework. The researcher has to conceptualize, identify and select a broad discipline before shortlisting the final aspects to be studied. Then it is to find out which of these aspects generate the maximum interest and lead one to work with enthusiasm and perseverance. Now we shall go ahead with the next term, that is effective or effectiveness. An educational approach is effective if it causes a desired change in a particular outcome. This desired change can be an increase in an outcome. For example, increase in students' achievement, or it can be a decrease in an outcome. For example, reduction in student absenteeism. Now we shall go ahead with empirical research, that is the next term of our discussion. Empirical research draws together the data based on experience or observation alone, often without due regard for system and theory. It presents observable data to substantiate its claims. This data may be primary, for example, observation and measurement of phenomena or events directly experienced by the researcher, or it can be secondary data, that is the data which has already been collected by other researchers. The processes adopted should be tested for the accuracy, and each step should be coherent in progression. This means that any conclusions drawn are based upon firm data gathered from information collected from real life experiences or observations. Now we will talk about the next term, that is evaluation. Evaluation is the systematic and objective assessment of an approach. It provides evidence of what has been done well, what could be done better, the extent to which objectives have been achieved, and the impact of a given approach. This evidence can then be used to inform ongoing decision making regarding the approach. The next term is evidence. Evidence in research is of any type. It can be any type of information that supports an assertion, hypothesis, or claim. Many types of evidence include insights drawn from student assessments, classroom observations, recommendations from different committees and commissions, and findings from research studies and synthesis. The two main types of evidence in research are research evidence. Research evidence is academic research such as casual research or synthesis research, which uses rigorous methods to provide insights into educational practice. The next type of evidence is practitioner generated evidence. This evidence is generated through practitioners in their daily practice. For example, teacher observations, information gained from formative assessments, or insights from student feedback or teacher practice. Evidence based practices is the next term that we are going to talk about. Evidence based practices are educational approaches that are backed up by research evidence. This means there is broad consensus from rigorously conducted evaluations that they work. Evidence informed practice is an educational approach that is applied using evidence from research together with a practitioner's professional expertise and judgment. The expertise and judgment used by practitioners can be based on knowledge or understanding of their students or the environment in which they work. The next term that I am going to talk about is experimental design research. This is a method used to establish a cause and effect relationship between two variables or among a group of variables. The independent variable is manipulated to observe the effect on the dependent variable. For example, the change in response between two groups of foreigners treated to welcome drinks and fresheners tissues, and the one that is simply welcomed and allocated rooms in a hurry due to peak hours of check in and check out. Now we shall go ahead with the next term. The next term is explanatory. Explanatory research is the research whose primary purpose is to explain why events occur, to build, elaborate, extend or test a theory. It is more concerned with showcasing, explaining and presenting what we already have. The next term is exploratory research. Exploration has been the humankind's passion since the time immemorial. Looking out for new things, new destinations, new food, new cultures has been the basis of most tourist and travel journeys. Another term that I am going to talk about is the term generalized or generalization. The researcher usually divides the identified population into smaller samples depending on the resources availability at the time of research being conducted. This sample is understood to be the appropriate representative of the identified population. Therefore, the findings should also be applicable to and representative of the entire population. The next term is findings from a piece of research. They can be generalized if they are a fair representation of trends in the wider population from which the study participants were sampled, or applicable to settings or context other than those in which the study was conducted. The next concept or term that I am going to talk about is hierarchy of evidence. Hierarchies of evidence are sometimes used to rank evidence according to rigor, helping people to compare and evaluate the quality of different types of research evidence. The higher up on the hierarchy, the more rigorous the methodology. Now, we shall go ahead with the next term, that is hypothesis. A hypothesis is an informed and educated prediction or explanation about something. It is the part of the research process which involves testing the hypothesis and then examining the results of these tests as they relate to both the hypothesis and the world around you. To hypothesize is to put forward an assumption or idea so that it can be tested to see whether it might be true. Now, we shall go ahead with the next term, that is intervention or treatment. It is an approach that is applied to address a problem, sometimes referred to as an intervention. For example, a teacher may implement a certain early literacy intervention to support struggling readers. In a research, an intervention is the approach that is being investigated, tested or evaluated. An intervention is sometimes called a treatment in research. The next term I am going to talk about here is literature review. A literature review identifies, evaluates and synthesizes the relevant literature within a particular field of research. It usually discusses common and emerging approaches, notable patterns and trends, areas of conflict and controversies, and gaps within the relevant literature. Literature reviews do not usually explicitly state the methods used to identify, evaluate, or synthesize the relevant literature. Now, we will talk about the next term, that is measurement scales. The greater the refinement in the unit of measurement of a variable, the greater the confidence, other things being equal, one can place in the findings. Media is another term that I am going to talk about now. It is documentation done on various issues, live coverage, panel discussions, etc. The next term is maturation effects. Maturation effects are the effects in a setting where an approach is applied that occur naturally, that would have occurred anyway, as opposed to the effects that occur as a result of the approach. For example, researchers may want to know the effect of a particular educational program on students' social and emotional skills. However, social and emotional skills develop over time as children mature, and so researchers need to distinguish between the effect of the educational program and the effects of natural development as a result of students getting older. The next term is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis uses statistical methods to summarize the results of individual studies. It is designed to assess the behaviors that lead to a particular approach working, or to provide an estimate of how much more likely one approach is to work over another. It is the quantitative version of a literature review or systematic review. The next term that I am going to talk about is mixed methods research. Mixed methods research is a research that uses both qualitative, that is non-numerical data, and quantitative, that is numerical data. Next term is monograph. A monograph is an academic piece of writing on a single subject or aspect of a subject that presents the findings of primary research or original scholarship. It is usually written by one person. Now we will talk about the next term, that is objective. The objectives provide an accurate description of the specific actions the researcher will take in order to reach the aim. An objective is measurable and operational. It tells specific things the researcher will accomplish in the research project. The next term is an outcome measure. An outcome measure is an observation that can be used to measure the effect of a particular approach. Outcome measures can be qualitative, such as quotes or observations, or quantitative, such as test scores. For example, when examining whether a particular approach helps students understand a concept, a teacher could set an assessment. The student assessment score could then be used as an outcome measure of a student understanding. Well, we shall continue the discussion on the key terms in research in our next lesson 2, that is in lesson number 4. I hope this session was helpful to you. Have a wonderful time. Thank you.